Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is 2024 presidential contender and North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum. Governor Burgum, thank you so much for joining me.
Brittany, great to be back with you again.
Of course, you are welcome back anytime, but I do want to talk about the last time we saw you on the national stage, which was last week at the second Republican presidential debate. And you were the candidate, unfortunately, who had the least amount of speaking time. So one, what do you think about that? And two, do you think the country was able to get a good sense of who you are and what you would do if you were elected president?
Well, obviously, Brittany, we'd love to have the whole 2 hours so we could share in depth our thoughts about economy, energy, national security, and how under Burgum administration, when I'm your president, we can improve every American life. But of course, these presidential debates, that sounds like it has a lot of gravitas, but I think everybody knows that they're political theater, and there's agenda, there's narratives that people are trying to drive, and we fought for every minute we had. And some people said, I was on a number of interviews where people said, hey, we think you won the debate. It's not just about how much time you have, it's about whether or not you're actually answering the questions, having the relevant experience. And when I've created more jobs than anybody else on that stage. I've created more jobs actually than the rest of the other 6 candidates on the stage combined. I've got more private sector experience than all of them. I've got the only one who's got a deep tech background. And when we've got technology changing every job, every company, every industry needs to change government. They're asking questions about AI, and none of those come my way. And then we talk about energy, which is great that we're talking about energy. We've been talking about that since day one. That's going to really determine how the direction of the world is going to determine global stability. It's going to really be a factor in the 2024 election. And as a leader of one of the largest energy states in the nation, we produce more energy in North Dakota than most OPEC nations. Again, not getting tossed in energy questions. So we were interjecting to get ourselves in those discussions. And when we did, I think people said, wow, there's someone who's got the relevant experience. He's been able to translate that into government in North Dakota, where we've been able to cut red tape. We cut expenses 27% my first 4 months in office. I mean, literally not just slowed the growth. We actually reduced the general fund by 27%. And now this last year, we passed the largest tax cut in history. So we know that's what needs to happen in Washington. We've already done it. And then you want to talk about the border. Again, everyone's saying this is what we're going to do with the border. We've already got troops on the border. We're already down there. I've been down there more times than Biden. So on any of the topics that came up, we feel we're not only the most qualified to talk about, but we feel we're actually working on the solutions now. We're not waiting for 2024.
You were one of the only contenders on that stage to not get into it with your fellow competitors, but instead at one point you were like, hey, you asked a question about childcare. That wasn't answered. Can I answer that? You also interjected on technology and energy questions, and you said this at one point. As the only person leading an energy state, can I answer the energy question? So how would you scale these ideas that you have nationally?
Well, it's pretty simple. On the energy front, it's all about selling energy to our friends and allies and stop buying it from our adversaries. Energy is the biggest tool we have to win the Cold War with China. China imports 10 million barrels of oil a day. They do not raise enough food to feed their own country, so they also import food. So you have a nation that has no energy security and no food security. And then we've had 4 leaders from the Biden administration, cabinet level people over there this summer. They can barely even get the appropriate meetings because the Cold War is right now what the Biden administration doesn't call it a Cold War. But when we send over a Secretary of State, you don't know if they're going to be able to get a meeting with the leader of the country. That's not just a cold shoulder. That's an indication of where we're at. And of course, China's built up the world's largest Navy now, larger than the United States. That's all about protecting the sea lanes. 30% of the trade in the world passes through the South China Sea. We're at such risk. I mean, if they wanted to do a blockade of Taiwan tomorrow, Taiwan has to import oil and natural gas to run that country. They don't have months of supply. I mean, the risk that we're at right now and what we've given up to China. It's just amazing that we've got ourselves in a situation, and we see what happens when you don't have deterrence in place. That's how Russia invades Ukraine, because the deterrence we have don't work, or you're signaling to the rest of the world that, oh, we'll withdraw from Afghanistan. We don't need strategic bases to project power to help stabilize the world. And so it's on everything: economy, energy, national security, 180 degrees the wrong direction. And when I'm your president, we're going to get that stuff fixed on day one.
I do want to talk about Russia specifically, because in our conversation last time, you point blank said, we are in a war with Russia. We just don't have the troops on the ground yet. And since then, I've been asking the other contenders that I've been able to speak with that same question to see where they land on this issue. And just this past weekend, in the 11th hour, a government shutdown was averted. But one of the things not in that stopgap measure was funding for Ukraine. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think this is, again, just the lack of leadership of the Biden administration. Clearly, there are Republicans that feel like the Ukraine is, somehow, nicknamed Hunter Biden's war because of the potential conflicts of Hunter Biden, serving on foreign country boards of directors and possible, payments to Biden family members that are really, point to influence peddling. And while everybody's innocent until they're proven guilty, I mean, it's super disturbing that we might have government officials at the highest levels enriching themselves and their family by just selling access and influence. I mean, that's like third world country stuff. So it is a really understandable to me that people are confusing these issues, and they just feel because of the corruption that is potentially shrouding the Biden family, that somehow then it's not important for us to support a democracy that has managed to, without us sending a troop, destroy 6,400 Russian tanks. I mean, the idea that if you just said, wow, I got a bargain for you, you send a little bit of money, no troops, and they'll destroy a peer competitors. I mean, 2 years ago, we thought Russia was one of our competitors as a superpower from a military standpoint. And little Ukraine has been able to take out a huge chunk of their capability. I mean, I don't call that irresponsible spending. I call that a bargain. But on the fact is, we do have, there's no blank checks. There has to be accountability. We have to track every dollar. We've got to get NATO to step up. All those things that just make common sense. But if you do let Putin just draw a line with a Sharpie on the map and say you get to keep what you have, we're basically inviting any foreign country to just invade a neighbor, and then whatever they get, we're just going to say, okay, let's call it good, and then you end up the way we did with North Korea, South Korea, and we see, wow, the difference between one of the world's strongest economies, South Korea, and one of the most oppressed nations in the world, North Korea. Those lines on the map can mean something for generations.
President Biden, when this bill came to his desk, he did release a statement saying we need more funding for Ukraine. Senators Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell also agree, but that wasn't in the House's bill. So point blank, do you support more funding for Ukraine?
I support us making sure that Putin does not get a win in Ukraine, because this idea that somehow, and we've got to understand as a nation, not Republicans or Democrats, that we have driven Russia into China's arms. Russia is now is China's discount gas station, and that somehow if we don't defeat Putin, it's basically handing another win to China. You can't say, oh, China's our existential threat, but let's not send money to Russia. Russia and China are absolutely connected. And then throw in North Korea, who's been meeting both with China and Russia. North Korea supplying arms to Russia. Iran, who the Biden administration gave $6 billion to in a hostage exchange, making the world totally a more dangerous place for every American traveler, every American business leader that's going abroad. You do that, and then who's supplying arms? Who's supplying drones to Russia? Iran. So it's like we're cutting deals outside of Congress through the Biden administration to send billions of dollars to Iran, and then we're not giving money to the one country that's actually fighting against these countries. So again, if we had the right leadership in the White House, Americans would understand the nature of this conflict, I think, in a deeper way, and understand why it's important for every American that we don't give Putin a win. A win for Putin is a win for China.
I do want to get back to the shutdown, but before I do that, I do want to ask you, what do you think is the bigger geopolitical threat to the United States, China or Russia?
China, absolutely. China's economy, I mean, their population is, almost 10x. Their economy could almost 10x of Russia. When we won the Cold War against Russia in the 1980s, Ronald Reagan taught us how to do that. We have to have a strong economy. We've got to have growth, at 4 or 5%. That's possible if we cut all the red tape that's choking America, and all the inflationary spending in the Biden administration, which is raising the price of food on the table and gas at the pump. All of that can be turned around, but we've got to get the economy going. But the existential threat is China. And the idea that somehow people are saying, oh, we shouldn't send money to Ukraine because we need to spend it on our own border. Actually, America, we can do both of those things at the same time. And it's not that hard. Having been to the border multiple times, I can tell you down there, the border, our U.S. Border Patrol, they've closed the border in the past. If we gave them the tools, the manpower, the equipment, and the mission and the technology to do it, they would close the border. So it's not like fighting a war. I mean, we are at war with the cartels for sure, and we're at war with China because of all the fentanyl that's coming across that's killing 300 Americans every day, which is a tragedy. Those are sons and daughters and nieces and nephews. I mean, we've lost the equivalent of 5 Vietnams since Biden took office, of mass casualties coming across the border. But we can help Ukraine beat Russia, and we can secure our own border at the same time. But the real focus has to be China. That's where the real threat is.
I do want to talk about the GOP and specifically them involved in this near shutdown, the shutdown that didn't happen. But one of the major reasons it almost did was Republican infighting between further right Republicans like Congressman Matt Gaetz and more moderate Republicans like House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. So as you know, we were on the brink of a shutdown. I don't need to explain the dire economic consequences that could have happened if it did in fact happen. But how do you bring cohesion to your party? Because it seems very fractured at this moment, especially in the House.
Well, I think part of this is, we're in a position where we've got barely a majority in the House. We do not have a majority in the Senate. If we want to actually cut spending, it's going to take leadership in the White House. We're going to have to take the Senate back. And then we don't have to have government shutdowns. We can show America the Republicans actually know how to lead, that we know how to actually cut spending. And we can cut spending without reducing services. Everybody thinks that cutting spending is the end of the world. Like I said, in North Dakota, we cut spending and we didn't affect services because there's so much waste in how government approaches the private sector. It's why we need a private sector leader like myself in the White House. You have to have someone who's actually created jobs, who understands, someone who's balanced budgets, someone who's actually cut their budget when they were governor, not just increased it, less quickly. We've actually cut budgets, and that's what America needs right now. And when we do that, these shutdowns, the average American, they're out there trying to, make ends meet, and it's not helpful. The Republican Party may think they're winning or losing, but basically all of Americans don't trust Congress anymore because they think it's not functional. The brinkmanship associated with government shutdowns is not helpful. And there is a cost to government shutdowns if it actually happens. But even when there's a threat of one, I know the federal agencies in North Dakota the past 3 weeks have all been not spending their time serving citizens. They've been spending their time working on contingency plans. What are we going to do if our offices are shut? And so we waste taxpayers' money with this brinksmanship, and we just got to get back in the leadership position, show Americans the way, get inflation under control, cut the spending, and drive forward. It's all possible and it's all doable, but we have to have a fresh start in Washington. We can't have someone from inside the swamp who spent their career in Washington be the person that fixes it. It's got to be somebody from the outside.
I'm hearing you use terms and phrases like not functional, brinksmanship. So I'm curious, do you think House Speaker Kevin McCarthy is an effective speaker, an effective leader?
Well, one thing I've learned as governor is that the legislative branch, Americans don't get to vote on who the leader is. That's for that body themselves to decide. And so the Republican caucus is going to have to decide that themselves. Again, I'm running for president. I'm not running for pundit. All I can say is that I know that it's not helpful for our country or for the Republican Party if people think that we're not able to lead. And part of the way we have to lead is we've got to reduce the size of the federal government. We've got to return the power to the states. I'm a huge believer in the 10th Amendment. The federal government is out of its lane in so many different ways. And I also know that 10 to 20% of every one of those jobs is some mind-numbing, soul-sucking work that even the best federal team member does not want to do because it doesn't add any value and they know it. And so we have an opportunity, just like I did in the private sector, to take a cost out of it by making sure that the jobs have meaning and purpose. And a lot of people go into government because they want to make a difference, not because they want to just sit behind a desk and shuffle paper. And if we can reduce by 10 or 20%, I mean, 400,000 jobs out of the federal government, return that to the private sector, take other activity that agencies are doing, return that to the states. There's so much redundancy that happens at the federal level that could already be happening across the 50 states, and get more innovation. And I mean, it's crazy. I mean, even China, who we're competing with, when they had their explosive growth the last 10 years, the CCP, a communist party that we all think is in control, they delegated, in many cases, more power to the states in China than we do in the United States. We could actually learn something from them, which is it's entrepreneurship and innovation that's going to drive us forward. It's innovation. It's not federal regulation. There's never a one-size-fits-all regulation at the federal level. And so, again, getting the power back to the states, we get the economy going. That's going to help improve every American life. That's going to bring out the best of America. And we start focusing on what the people are doing and what the states are doing, instead of having turning Washington, D.C. into a nonstop reality TV show that some people, it's not helpful. We're in real competition around the globe. We've got to get government that functions again. And one way to do that is just move the power back to the states.
I've talked to you back in the summer. I've seen you speak in Iowa on various interviews, even on debate stages. And one trend that you always keep to is you want to cut red tape. You're the guy who wants to cut red tape. And something I just jotted down that you said is you've in North Dakota cut spending, but that didn't affect services. How exactly did you do that?
Well, it's Brittany, is what we just talked about. Is you've got to go through and decide what you can stop doing. And when you can stop doing stuff that the citizens don't care about and doesn't add value, it just immediately saves cost. Every state and the federal government has a budgeting process. We added in North Dakota from day one a strategic planning process. We said strategy's got to drive budget, not budget driving strategy. And when strategy starts driving budget, and when you have we had strategic reviews, some of them a full day long with over 70 agencies, and we've done that, every 2 years through our budget cycle. We have a 2-year budget cycle. We do not start budgeting until we have the strategic review. So hours and hours and hours of strategic planning to say, okay, who's your customer? Oh, the taxpayers your customer? Well, specifically, which taxpayers? And what do they want? What are the services they need? What do they don't like? What are the stuff you're doing that we can just stop doing? We passed 51 red tape reduction bills this last spring, including crowdsourcing ideas from the public. And when we get rid of stuff, it saves cost, and the citizens don't care because it doesn't add value, and the team members at the state level are thrilled because they can stop doing the stuff that's not adding any value to them or to the citizens. Focus on what matters. And some of that also requires the fact that we've got to move into the 21st century with technology. I'll go around to groups and say, how many of you have a supercomputer in your pocket, AKA a smartphone? Everybody's got one. And then I'll say, well, how many of you have an app from the federal government on your phone? And I have yet to have somebody raise their hand, because the whole world has gone to cloud mobile apps. Everybody's doing business on their phone, not the federal government. Federal government, good luck with that. And so anyway, we've got such an opportunity by investing more in IT and connecting with people where they are, that will also, instead we build a building and then we staff it. We make citizens come to us, take a number and wait at a window. We're so 1970s as opposed to being, currently caught up. And so again, anybody that says that you can't take 20% of the cost out of the federal government without, affecting services has never run a business. Because if they'd run a business and they'd been in the competitive world like I was in software, you'd understand exactly how much unnecessary work and cost and buildings and space, is tied up in delivering federal government. And it all can go away, and the citizens can just cheer alongside of it, because we can get their taxes down.
I do want to move on to the primary, and as you've probably seen, polls after the debate didn't show anyone moving out of that pack, breaking free, catching up to front runner Donald Trump. So how realistically do you gain that ground?
Well, I think for us it's very different. We're the least, you asked this back when we met in June, and still the case today, even though we've made great progress, particularly in Iowa and New Hampshire, we're still the least known person on the stage. And in those early markets, but we're ahead in Iowa, New Hampshire of other candidates that were on the stage with us on Wednesday night, and yet only 50% of the people in Iowa, New Hampshire know us. If we could, double our name recognition to get it as high and close to 100% like some of the other candidates, we'd be likely in the low single digits in those states. And I think then people would be like, "Wow, where did Doug Burgum come from?" Because he just launched on June 7th and now he's already above 10%. So we're just continuing to, get the word out, continuing to get out and meet people around those two states. And we know that people understand and like the message. They love the fact that I'm someone who grew up, working jobs, the farm, the ranch, the grain elevator, even working as a chimney sweep to pay my way through college, that I've had all these jobs where you take a shower at the end of the day, not at the beginning of the day. They love the fact that I'm, a job creator that understands technology and competition with China. In 1989, I was in China, I don't say as a kid, but as a young entrepreneur, and walked into a street market and there was Great Plains software being sold for $1 for a 5 1/4 inch floppy, which is, again, an old, go to a computer museum. That's how software used to be sold. But we were selling it for $5,000 a module. They were selling it for $1. So for 34 years, I've had China stealing all my IP, and I'm competing against people that as recently as a month ago didn't think that we were in a Cold War with China. So so when we're out talking to people on the ground, there's a lot of enthusiasm. We received so much positive feedback from the second debate. People were like, "Hey, we need to hear more. We need to hear more from that guy because he's actually talking about solutions. He's got the experience to deliver it." So we're going to keep fire away, and we've got almost as much time between now and when the voting starts as when we launch. So we like our trajectory, and we expect to see ourselves in running near the top when the voting starts in January.
Let's say you do become the nominee, your party's nominee. What is the strategy to beat President Biden, assuming he's the Democratic nominee as well?
Well, the strategy is the same topics that were here. We know that independent voters are the ones that are going to make the decision for America. And we know that independent voters, like all Democrats and like all Republicans, are suffering under the inflation of the Biden administration. We know that they're all, fighting to make ends meet. We know that they all know they're paying too much for their gas and too much to heat their homes and too much for their electricity under the Biden energy policies. And they all know that every state's a border state because, you can't go anywhere. Everywhere we go, things like the fentanyl deaths, those are not partisan issues. You could be an independent Democrat or Republican and somebody or a family member who's been affected by the disease of addiction or who's died of a fentanyl poisoning because of the amount and quantity of fentanyl coming from China through the Mexican border. And so we have we have the messaging that is going to hit the center of this country. And it's the same reason why in 2016 and in 2020, running as an outsider, we won our races in North Dakota by more than 40 points, with largest margins of any gubernatorial candidates in the country in those years, because we understand that in the executive branch, it's not like Congress. Congress, you put on a red jersey, a blue jersey, you throw, bombs at each other, you snipe at each other, you go raise money on social media, to fight each other in this constant battle. But when you're in the executive branch, like when we say, when there's a blizzard in North Dakota, and North Dakota is the size of all 6 New England states, when there's a blizzard in North Dakota, we plow the roads for Republicans, independents, and Democrats. It's not about the red versus blue. It's the red, white, and blue. And that's why we know that we're the best of anybody on that stage to win and beat Joe Biden in November 2024, because we understand the executive role branch. We understand we're going to return the power to the states. And that's why we know we have been from day one running a campaign that allows us to win in November of 2024.
Governor, I do need to let you go, but before I do want to ask one final question. You weren't the only person to recently suffer an Achilles-related injury. I know we're crossing sports here, but Jets quarterback Aaron Rodgers reportedly said he is trying to get back on the field this season. So when can we expect you back on the court again?
Well, I tell you, if Aaron can do that, that's incredible. Kevin Durant, switching to other sports, one of the best basketball players to ever live. It was 12 months before he was back back in the NBA. So kudos to Aaron. But we're following Aaron, cheering for him. And of course, everybody in North Dakota is cheering because the guy that snaps him the ball off at the center for the Jets, Connor McGovern, Fargo Shanley High School grad, Fargo, North Dakota, and a lot of us were actually in North Dakota became Jets fans because we're like, this is the year, and we're going to have a kid from Fargo winning a Super Bowl ring. So the whole state was pretty disappointed when Aaron went down. We wish him well and hope he'll come back. And that'd be amazing if he could make it back for the playoffs.
And we hope to see you back on the court as well. Governor Doug Burgum, thank you so much for joining me. You're welcome back anytime.
Great. Thank you, Brittany. Great to be with you.